Two silver sedans parked nose to tail in the same auction lane, under the same row of buzzing lights, both about 14 years old, both wearing that flat, chalky clear coat that only happens after a decade of parking outside. One is a Camry. The one behind it is a Lexus IS. The odometers are within a few thousand miles of each other, somewhere just under 200,000. The condition sheets say almost exactly the same thing. Walk past those two, and I'd bet money on which one you'd call the safer buy. Camry. Everybody knows Camrys last. Accords last. That's not even an opinion anymore. It's closer to folklore, and folklore is hard to argue with. So here's the number that took the legs out from under mine. A used car analytics firm has been running the same longevity study since 2013. Last year, they chewed through the odometer readings on close to 400 million vehicles and worked out, model by model, the odds of a car reaching 250,000 miles. Average passenger car, and that's sedans, coupes, and hatchbacks together, came out at 2.5%. The Camry landed at 9%. The Accord just behind it at a bit under 9%. Very good. 3.5 times the average, exactly the reputation well earned. The Lexus IS came in at 27.5%. 3 times the Camry's odds. 10 times the average car. And the strange part isn't that a Lexus did well. It's that 4 other 4-door sedans also outlasted the 2 cars everybody points to, and almost nobody talks about any of them. One of them is a car Toyota has already killed off. One of them is barely its own car at all. It's another car in a nicer suit, and I'll say so when we get there. One of them isn't on that list and can't be, because they stopped building it in 2011, and I'm putting it in anyway. I've had the timing cover off enough of Toyota's V6s to recognize the smell of one particular oil trail before the flashlight is even steady, which is how I know that the reason the Camry sits where it sits on that chart is not the engine. The engine is superb. It's one rubber part that somebody signed off on, and then a second decision made after they already knew that I still find hard to be polite about. That's later. 5 sedans. For each one, the single part that decides whether it sees 250,000 miles or dies at a 140. And a check you can run on any of them in a parking lot in about 2 minutes without tools. Let's start at the top of the list, because the top of the list is the one that makes the least sense. Before the countdown, one thing about the numbers, because it changes how much weight you should put on all of this. That study doesn't strap cars to a dyno and run them until they break. It looks at what odometers actually read at each age and models forward from there, which means it isn't purely a measure of how long a car can survive. It's partly a measure of how long people are willing to keep feeding one. Those are related, but they're not the same thing. And the firm doesn't publish the guts of the model, so I can't check it. My read is that the ranking is directionally right, and the exact decimals are worth a lot less than they look. Take the order seriously. Don't get attached to the third digit. The other thing worth saying up front is that the gap between these cars and the average is not subtle. The average passenger car has roughly a 1 in 40 shot at 250,000 miles. The car at the top of this list is better than 1 in 4. That's not a rounding difference between good cars and slightly better ones. That's a different category of object. And the thread running through all 5, the thing I actually want you to walk away with, is this. None of these cars die of old age. Each one has a single component that decides the entire story. And in 4 cases out of 5, it's a part you could hold in one hand. Number 1. The Lexus IS, 27.5%. A compact rear-drive luxury sedan is not what anybody expects at the top of a durability list. Rear-drive sport sedans are supposed to be the cars that eat money. But look at what's actually underneath one, and the mystery gets a lot smaller. The IS is Toyota mechanicals in nicer clothes. The good ones, the 350s, run the 3.5-liter V6 from the same family that hauls Highlanders and Siennas around all day. Timing chain, not a belt. An ASIN automatic that Toyota has been quietly refining since before some of you were driving. And because the engine sits north to south instead of jammed in sideways, there's room around it. Room matters more than people give it credit for. Room means less heat soaking into the accessories, and it means replacing a water pump is a job rather than an ordeal, which brings us to the part that decides it. On these V6s, the water pump starts weeping somewhere around 100 to 120,000 miles. It doesn't fail dramatically. It leaves a crust of dried pink coolant on the front of the engine and a faintly sweet smell after a hot run. Catch it there and you're into it for somewhere between $350 and $900, depending on who does the work. Ignore it, drive it low on coolant through one August afternoon, and you've cooked a cylinder head on an interference engine. Same car, same week. Two completely different endings, decided by whether anybody bothered to look. Now the honest part, because the IS is not one car. The IS 250 used a smaller direct-injected V6, and direct injection means no fuel is washing over the back of the intake valves the way it used to. Carbon builds up on them like soot in a chimney. You get a rough, idle misfires and a $400 to $1,000 session with a walnut blaster to clean it off. The 350 is the one to want, and it isn't close. If you go back further, the early 2000s is 300 used the naturally aspirated version of the inline-six that made the Supra famous. And those are genuinely overbuilt engines, but that generation is old enough now that the car around the engine is usually the problem. Beyond that, the complaints on these are the ordinary ones. Alternators, rear brake calipers seizing, which people blame on the car, and which is usually just what happens to a rear caliper that hasn't been touched in 8 winters. Navigation screens that die and cost silly money. Annoying, not fatal. Why does the IS top the chart when its own dealer network will tell you the smaller engine has that carbon flaw? Honestly, I don't fully know. My best explanation is that it's a Toyota drivetrain owned by people who tend to actually service cars driven fewer miles per year than a family Camry and parked indoors more often than not. That's a guess about owners, not a measurement of metal, and I'd rather flag that I'm reasoning than pretend I'm reporting. Number 2. The Toyota Avalon. Just under 19%. Toyota stopped building these in August of 2022, which tells you a great deal about the market and nothing whatsoever about the car. The Avalon is the Camry's older, bigger, softer sibling, and the mechanism behind its lifespan is almost embarrassingly simple. It's the same 3.5-liter V6 doing less work, around 268 horsepower, in a large, comfortable car that spends most of its life at part throttle on an interstate with an owner who is in no hurry at all. Big oil capacity, timing chain, an engine that is genuinely understressed in this application, and understressed is the entire ball game. Metal doesn't get tired from existing. It gets tired from being asked. There's a second thing. And it's the advantage big sedans have always quietly had. Highway miles are the cheap miles. A car that racks up 200,000 at a steady cruise has done a fraction of the thermal cycling and a fraction of the stop-start wear of a car that got there doing school runs and drive-thrus. 2 cars, same odometer, and one of them has had a much easier life. That's most of the gap between the Avalon and cars that look identical on paper. You'll notice the buyer profile does some of the work here too. These were bought by people who wanted a quiet cabin and a soft ride, and who read the maintenance schedule, and later in life, a lot of them ended up in rideshare service, where the miles are hard but the maintenance is at least regular because the car is a business. The hybrid version sits a little further down the same list, around 10%, which still puts it ahead of both cars in the title. The part that decides it on an Avalon is the rubber oil supply line feeding the variable valve timing actuator. Hold that thought, because that hose is the reason I wanted to make this video at all, and it gets its own section shortly. Behind it, in second place for things that will irritate you, are the ignition coils. Past 100,000, they start going one at a time, throwing a misfire code and a shaky idle. That's a cheap part and a 10-minute job on the front bank. It's a longer and more expensive conversation on the rear bank, which faces the firewall. And I'd say that's where most of the labor money on these cars ends up. Beyond that, on the older ones, the usual list: a steering column that clunks, and suspension bushings that have simply done their 15 years. And if you're going to look at a 2005 to 2008 Avalon this weekend, and somebody watching this is, don't put a deposit down until you've had the hood open. I'll tell you exactly what you're looking for in a few minutes. Number 3, the Honda Civic sedan, just under 11%. Still with me? Good. This next stretch has some grim history in it, so stay with it, because it's the one that will actually save somebody money. The Civic's mechanism isn't refinement, it's modesty. Small engine, light car, low loads. A 1.8-liter 4 moving a compact sedan is barely working, and an engine that's barely working doesn't wear out in any hurry. Then add the largest part supply of any car in North America. That sounds like a boring advantage. It is the most important one on this entire list because cars almost never die of a seized engine. They die on the day the repair estimate is bigger than the car is worth. Cheap parts and a shop full of people who have done the job 100 times is what pushes that day further into the future. The part that decides a Civic is the automatic transmission fluid, and specifically the fact that almost nobody changes it. These transmissions are not fragile. They just aren't forgiving of fluid that's been cooked for 150,000 miles, and the failure is expensive enough to end the car. The honest caveat is a serious one. Civics built from 2006 through 2008 and some early 2009s have a casting defect in the 1.8-liter block. It cracks, coolant leaks, the engine overheats, and the fix is a new engine. Honda never issued a recall. After a class action, they extended the block warranty out to 8 years, then 10, with no mileage limit, and that extension has long since expired. So if you're shopping a Civic of that vintage now, the question isn't whether it's been serviced, it's whether the block has already been replaced. And a dealer can tell you from the VIN in about a minute. Whether the later castings actually cured the underlying problem or simply moved the failure further down the road is something I have never seen properly explained by anybody, Honda included. One more, on the newer end. The small turbocharged engine in the 2016 to 2018 cars had a fuel dilution issue in cold climates, where unburnt fuel found its way past the rings and thinned the oil. If you're in a cold state and looking at one of those, that's the thing to ask about. And short trips in winter are the conditions that bring it out. Number 4. The Acura ILX, a hair under 11%. It's a 9th generation Civic with thicker glass, better sound deadening, and a nicer badge. That's not an insult, it's the reason it's on the list. The 2013 to 2015 cars got an ordinary 5-speed automatic, and ordinary 5-speed automatics are why your uncle's cars all lasted forever. From 2016, they fitted an 8-speed dual clutch instead, and that's the one to look at twice. Same deciding part as the Civic. Same answer. Next, number 5. The Ford Crown Victoria, and its twin, the Mercury Grand Marquis. This one is not on the study, and it can't be. Production ended in 2011, so a model built on current odometer readings has almost nothing left to chew on. I'm including it because leaving it out would be dishonest and because it demonstrates the whole point better than the other 4 put together. Body on frame. A separate steel chassis with a body bolted on top of it, which is how trucks are built and how cars stopped being built decades ago. A 4.6-liter V8 making around 224 horsepower, which was already an embarrassment in 2011 and is precisely why the thing lasts. 4.5 liters of displacement, producing what a modern turbocharged 4 makes without breathing hard. Timing chains. An enormous sump. A 4-speed automatic with 3 fewer things to go wrong than the 8 speeds we get now. But the real mechanism isn't the engine, it's repairability. And repairability is what actually determines lifespan once a car is worth less than $4,000. Bend a fender on a unibody car and you're straightening structure. Bend a fender on one of these and you unbolt it. Every police department in the country ordered them for exactly that reason, and taxi fleets ran them because a driver could keep earning while the car was being fixed instead of waiting 3 weeks on a body shop. The fleet cars got extras worth knowing about if you're shopping: an external engine oil cooler, a heavier alternator, a stronger cooling package. Those cars also lived brutal lives at high idle, so a police car is a gamble, but the hardware underneath it is the good hardware. What kept those fleets running wasn't anything clever either. It was oil changes at 3,000 miles with bulk oil, done religiously, on a schedule set by somebody whose job depended on the car being available tomorrow morning. For those of you still here this deep in, this is the detail I'd actually want if I were the one shopping. The part that decides a Crown Victoria is the intake manifold. On 1996 through 2001 cars, it's plastic all the way across, including the coolant crossover at the front, and it cracks. When it lets go, it dumps coolant into the valley of the engine, and if you keep driving, you have an aluminum engine that's been run hot. Ford revised it with a cast aluminum crossover. So you stand at the front of the engine, you look at the crossover just behind the radiator, and you're looking for metal, not black plastic. A car with the updated part is a different animal from a car without it. 3 more honest notes, and none of them are small. The 2-valve heads on this engine have a reputation for spitting spark plugs out under compression and stripping the threads in the head. It's fixable with an insert, it's infuriating, and it's real. The Grand Marquis often carried rear air suspension, and 20-year-old air springs are a bill nobody enjoys, though a coil conversion is cheap enough. And in a salt state, the frame is the thing that ends these cars, not the engine, which is a sentence you could carve above the door of every shop north of the Ohio River. Now, before I get to the part I've been circling, one bit of housekeeping, because somebody is already typing. If you count hybrids and hatchbacks, the list is longer than 5. A Prius outranks everything here except the top 2, and the hybrid versions of the Camry and the Avalon both beat the regular Camry as well. I left them out because the title said sedans, and I'd rather keep the promise than pad the count. But if you're genuinely shopping for the longest lasting thing on 4 doors, and you don't care what shape it is, The hybrids deserve a serious look, and that surprised me the first time I saw the data, because I spent years assuming a battery would be the thing that killed those cars. It hasn't been. I'll go a step further and say I got that one wrong out loud more than once to people who were asking me for advice. The reasoning seemed sound at the time. Big expensive battery, unknown chemistry, 12-year-old car, obvious answer. What I hadn't thought about is that a hybrid drivetrain runs its engine less, starts it warm, and hands most of the braking to a motor instead of to pads and rotors. Everything in that system is doing less work than it would in a conventional car, and less work is the only durability principle that has held up across every single vehicle in this video. The battery turned out to be the part I was watching, while the rest of the car quietly got easier on itself. Right. The rubber hose. That oil line on the Toyota V6. Here's what happened, and here's what it means for you if you own one. The line feeds oil under pressure to the variable valve timing actuator. On the original design, part of it is rubber hose. Crankcase gases work on that rubber from the outside over the years until a pinhole opens up. Once it does, you don't get a drip on your driveway. You get pressurized oil leaving a running engine, and the first thing plenty of owners noticed was a noise and a warning light, in that order, too late. Starting around 2010, Toyota ran a service campaign covering over 1 million vehicles across the Avalon, the Camry, the RAV4, the Sienna, and the Lexus ES and RX, not a safety recall. A limited service campaign, which is a different animal carrying a different set of obligations, and the practical effect of that distinction is that a lot fewer owners ever hear about it. Now sit with this part. The remedy hose, fitted to a great many of those cars, still had a rubber section in it. Meanwhile, the fully metal tube already existed. It was already going into the premium Lexus models. So the correct part was designed, tooled, in production, and sitting on a shelf. And the car in your driveway got another piece of the material that had just failed. Owners started reporting the replacement letting go too, some of them at genuinely absurd mileage, which is exactly what you would predict from a fix that addressed where the problem happened rather than why. Run the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is the accusation. That metal pipe sells for under $20 across a parts counter. What the rubber one costs you, when it opens up on an on-ramp and the oil pressure light comes on about 8 seconds before the bearings do, is an engine, not a repair bill. An engine in a car that was otherwise going to run for another decade, and that's if you were lucky enough for it to happen somewhere with a shoulder. I want to be fair about what I don't know here. I can't tell you whether that was somebody choosing the cheaper hose or an engineering group genuinely believing the reformulated rubber was good enough. I've never seen a document either way, and I'm not going to invent a motive to make the story cleaner. Toyota also kept extending that campaign for years, which is more than a lot of manufacturers would have done, but you were told it was fixed. If your car got the hose instead of the tube, it wasn't fixed. It was postponed, and you were the one carrying a risk you didn't know had been handed to you. Here's what strikes me about every car on this list, though. Not one of them lasts because of a feature. Nobody ever advertised any of this. There was no commercial about the Avalon's oil capacity, no brochure page about bolt-on fenders, no conversation in a showroom about a Civic being cheap to fix in 12 years' time. Durability is the residue. It's what's left over after a few hundred unglamorous decisions made by people whose names are on nothing. Somebody specified a chain instead of a belt and had to defend the cost in a meeting. Somebody drew a casting thicker than the load case strictly required, because they'd seen what salt does over 15 winters. Somebody insisted on keeping room around the water pump when the packaging team wanted those millimeters back for something more visible. Nobody got promoted for any of it. Most of those people are retired now and have no idea that a car they argued about for 18 months in 1998 is still getting somebody to a night shift in Ohio. That's the quiet trade underneath all of this. Every car you have ever owned is a stack of judgment calls made by strangers, and the good ones were made by people who bothered to imagine you existing. Not the first owner, the one who financed it new and kept it 4 years. You, the fourth one, in the rain, with a flashlight. So, the recap, in the order the numbers put them. The Lexus IS, best odds on the list by a wide margin, and take the 350 over the 250 for the carbon reason. Watch the water pump, and the tell is pink crust on the front of the engine. The Toyota Avalon. The same V6 doing less work, on the easiest miles a car can do. Watch the oil line, and after that, the coils. The Honda Civic sedan. Light, modest, and cheap to keep alive, which is the actual mechanism, not the reputation. Change the transmission fluid. Run the VIN on anything from 2006 to early 2009 before you buy it. The Acura ILX, a Civic in better clothes, with the plainer transmission on the earlier cars, and the Crown Victoria or Grand Marquis. Off the charts entirely, alive because you can fix it. Confirm the aluminum coolant crossover, and in a salt state, get under it and look at the frame before you look at anything else. One general point on fluid, since it applies to all of them. If your car has no transmission dipstick and the manual describes the fluid as filled for life, understand what that sentence is doing. Fluid doesn't become immune to heat because a marketing department found a word for it. Every transmission specialist I've listened to on this reads lifetime as meaning the warranty period, and while I've never seen that written down anywhere official, I've also never heard an explanation that fits the evidence better. A drain and fill every 60,000 miles is cheap. A valve body packed with clutch material is not. Then there's the 2-minute check I promised, and you can do it tonight in your own driveway, with a phone light, before you ever do it on somebody else's car. Open the hood. On the Toyota V6 cars, look down the passenger side of the engine for the small line running into the timing cover and see whether it's metal the whole way or has a black rubber section in it. On the Panther cars, look at the coolant crossover at the front of the intake and see whether it's aluminum or plastic. On any car on this list, run the light across the front of the engine and look for dried pink or orange crust where there shouldn't be any. 3 things. No tools. And by the time you shut the hood, you'll know something about your own car that the previous owner almost certainly never did. Now, the comment I actually want. If you think I've called this wrong, I would much rather hear from you than from the people who agree with me. Camry and Accord owners especially. If you're sitting on 300,000 miles on an original engine, come and say so, and bring the model year and the number, because that's the kind of evidence that would actually move me. I've built an argument on one data set and a lot of hours with the hood up, and one data set is still one data set. While you're in there, tell me where you're watching from. A car that reached 250,000 miles in Arizona and a car that reached it in Ohio are not the same achievement. And the people in the Rust Belt usually have the stories worth reading. If this was useful, subscribing helps. There's a thread from this one I deliberately left alone, which is what happens when the fix a manufacturer offers you is technically a fix. I keep running into it on cars from every manufacturer on Earth, and I haven't worked out yet how to talk about it without getting angrier than I'd like to be out loud. I'll get there. Go look at your oil line. Then go get some sleep.